Jen, um, Cassie isn't going to make it tonight. So I just want to start with a quick announcement just in terms of membership of Master Plan Implementation Committee. So Peter Hobson contacted me in August saying that just because of new job and family commitments, he was actually going to step down from his liaison position from Affordable Housing Steering Committee to Master Plan Implementation Committee. And he had missed a couple meetings leading up to it. And I think he just felt like I'm too much. I'm not going to get this juggling right. I went back to Rob Jeffers, who is chair of Affordable Housing Steering Committee, and asked them to nominate a new liaison. Rob's response was, Jen has been going to the Affordable Housing Steering Committees as a liaison in that direction. And he felt like this year, since Jen, you're still so involved in Affordable Housing Steering Committee, that we leave that liaison seat open, unappointed from Affordable Housing back to Master Plan Implementation Committee. I'm okay with that, but Jen, if at some point, like, it's not working for you to do double duty and, or you get pulled into another committee, and we need to go back to them and say, you know what, you got to step up and send somebody, we will. But for now, I talked with Lauren, I talked with Carrie from Select Board and Chris, and we're just going to leave it empty for now. Are you okay with that, Jen?
Yeah, that's totally fine. I've been going to all of those meetings, and I will say it ended up creating a little bit of double duty because both Peter and I were going back and forth, but I appreciate why it existed for this arrangement, so I think just keeping it as is for now, and then if I ever find that there's a reason we don't have sufficient coverage, then I'll definitely bring it up.
Yeah. And honestly, I'd rather, it makes our quorum 8. So we'll always be short 1 from a quorum perspective, but I think we do pretty well in terms of people attending. So I'm not worried about it. And, as I said, if at some point you don't want to carry that water, we'll ask the steering committee to step up. Then second announcement was related to open space and rec. Again, Tom Callahan resigned from Open Space and Rec. And so he is no longer the liaison from Open Space and Rec to a Master Plan Implementation Committee. Peter Pescatori has a newly staffed committee, and Marissa Manley has volunteered from Open Space and Rec to be the liaison appointment to Master Plan Implementation Committee. So her formal appointment will happen at the Select Board in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to meet with her one-on-one next week just to bring her up to speed on what is Master Plan Implementation Committee and what have we been working on, and sort of plug her in that way. So we'll have one new member, Marissa, who will join us for our next meeting, and we'll have one empty seat, like a good Seder, speaking of Jewish holidays, with the Affordable Housing Steering Committee. So that's kind of where we are with the committee itself. And so with that, I'll do a quick call to order and roll call at 6:38. Present Katie Dugan.
Present Tim Davis.
Present Julia Gleason.
Present Amy Glassmeyer.
Present Jen Boylan.
Okay, guys, thank you. So next up on the agenda was a planning update from Lauren, and you and I didn't touch base about what you were going to cover, but I kind of put it on there since we haven't had a planning update in a while, and it just sort of felt like as we're starting the fall to sort of connect on that point would be helpful. So
sure.
You share what you think is appropriate.
Sure. So I'll just give you just a little overview of a couple of things. First, just from a town hall perspective, inside town hall, we have a couple of new sort of faces that you may have heard of. We have Charlotte, and now her last name, of course, Pechtel. I can't pronounce it so correctly. Charlotte Pechtel is our new conservation agent. She started in the end of August, so we're happy to bring her on board. And we also, Brianna Bennett, some of you may be familiar with the name. She's been an intern with the town for about a year now, I would say. She primarily had been working with Alternative Energy Committee, but they've recently increased her role to add some more hours to and provide her the position of energy and environmental assistant. So she's giving some time as well to some of our harbor initiatives, which she brings a lot of energy to. So trying to sort of beef up some capacity around our resiliency and some of these initiatives, as we have so many different plans and goals sort of in the implementation stages right now. In addition, I'll let the group know that if you haven't heard already, that the town council RFP has been settled, and we have now KP Law as the firm that's primarily going to be town council for the town. We've been little by little trying to, incrementally connect all the dots and it's a lot of work to have this new firm come in and transition. So we've been connecting them, of course, with select board and planning board, and we're actually planning. We had Katie meet as chair of master plan, met with Carolyn Murray today, who's our primary land use contact. And I'm also going to be working with them to connect them into some of the harbor plan initiatives that are coming up within the next month. So we have a lot of sort of transitioning, but a lot of good things and excitement happening at town hall. Certainly, as people sort of pick back up into the school year, and now we're preparing for a special town meeting in December. It's kind of a flurry of activity right now, it feels. Some things just from the planning department, we are procedurally working on process improvements like fee schedule updates and, try to consolidate our applications and just, modernize things. One of the things that we are looking to really transition this year is going to be e-permitting for the zoning and planning boards, so that those applications hopefully will sort of correspond and you can look at them online, and they will interface with sort of the building permit portal right now. So those are things that are going on in terms of our department. Other than board and committee work, I would say that the planning board currently has 2 open public hearing applications, both our site plan review applications along the Route 3 corridor. One is it's a larger site. It's over by Extra Space Storage towards the north of town along King Street. And it's actually, if you think about the Extra Space Storage, if you look back, it's a really steep hill, untouched land. They're proposing actually a sort of office complex park up there. So it would be some commercial development for the town if this were to come to fruition. That's going before the planning board. It's been here for a couple of months now. And then the other open application is a smaller site on the other side toward the Scituate line. It's 808 Chief Justice Cushing Highway, and that's for Todd Emmeling. It's a plumbing company, and he's looking to sort of take over that building that was formerly, I believe that's a pool supply store. So those are the 2 things that have been open and continuing before planning board. And then, of course, we also start to prepare for, special town meeting and some zoning conversations, but I won't get too much into the thick of those, as I know we have a lot to cover on those later on the agenda. So that in a nutshell is a couple of updates I can think of. And if anybody has any questions for me about anything planning related, I'm happy to take them.
One quick question, Lauren. Who does Brianna report to? Does she report to you?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay. And what boards?
Terrific.
That's fantastic. Little extra capacity. Is she considered half-time or full-time? Just out of curiosity.
Half-time.
Okay. She's half-time. And she's still supporting AEC, correct? And is she supporting CHIP or Harbor or both?
Both.
Okay, so CHIP and Harbor. Okay, great. All right, well, we're not gonna start up fighting for another 1.0, maybe, so.
The harbor would like 100% of her. Thank you very much.
Well, no, I'm talking about even more. I want, so we got it. We got it 0.5. I'm still going for broke and asking for another whole 1.0 as part of the.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So we'll fight that good fight when the fiscal 23 budget cycle is upon us in only probably 3 or 4 months. Thank you for that update. The Scituate Hill complex, just out of curiosity, I don't know how you measure commercial building. Square footage is one, but I was more curious to sort of understand perhaps the makeup of the buildings. Is it going to be one building? Is it going to be multiple buildings? Just to kind of get a little sense of like the size of that proposed complex maybe versus, I'm not sure what else we have in town. Well, maybe probably the best one, at least for me visually, is like the old Colony across the street that has the mixed use. But relative to that, how big is it?
So it will be actually, it's going to be a series of smaller footprints. What they try, if you look at the sort of campus, it's terraced into the hill. They were trying to come at this from a minimal sort of site disturbance and take advantage of the topography of the site. So you'll have sort of units that without need of stairs, you can have, they enter on, you know, one grade level for 2 units down there. And on the second floor, if you will, they're entering from the other opposite edge. So they're really taking advantage of that topography. So the footprint will be a different feel. It will be smaller sort of office pods, and then they'll have like one community center. And the concept that they have explained is this is sort of coming from an uptick in people, you know, wanting to, or having more flexible work styles, working from home. Of course, with the pandemic, a lot more people were working from home, and now even as they return, they're anticipating some more flexibility. So, you know, seeing how popular sort of the WeWork workstations and things like that in the area were, that's sort of where they've, you know, try to get this concept for. So, so it will be a different feel, and I can't really think of a good example of something nearby that we could think of. But it's you know, I almost kind of you know, on when you're heading on South Main down toward Countryway and Scituate, where you go toward like the little apex, it looks like a little cluster of villages.
Yeah.
That's kind of I think the closest sort of similarity I could draw, because it won't be one large mass of a building. It'll be spread out and broken up across an 8-acre site.
Okay.
It's
That's
30
not the one up behind Public's space. Is this a different location?
This is the one back behind extra space storage. Yes.
Okay.
It's going to be 32,000 square feet, of which I think 14 is collective space, and the residual is about 300 square foot per unit offices.
Yes.
Who's speaking?
Amy is speaking.
Oh, you can't see me?
No.
Wow.
Well, we believe in you.
We assumed it was by choice.
Clap, everybody clap.
It's really not. I don't know why I'm dark like that.
Okay.
Are we talking about this later? Because I don't want to jump the gun. I'm just curious about traffic management for that, but I don't want to get down.
And
the path.
also, is it all commercial? There's no
100%
residential stuff?
Yeah, I if you don't mind tabling that, because I actually have a place I think we should segue a comment in to some of those 3A North documents about that, because I noted the same thing. All right, so that's the planning update, unless there's any other questions. So I just wanted to quickly bring up one document just to kind of keep us in the loop around what's happening on some of the committees that we work with from time to time. Where's my, there it is. Okay. Lauren, do I have sharing capabilities? I do. All right. So I wanted, this isn't the most updated version. This is the select board's goals. The select board annually puts together goals for their own committee, which in general tie to goals that the town has. And a lot of times in the past, they've tied to issues that are critical path for the next fiscal year for the community. In the last 2 years, they've tied pretty closely to some of the stuff that we've been recommending in our either initial recommendations or our annual update for Master Plan Implementation Committee. So I just wanted to quickly, if you guys haven't seen it, and when I get the updated presentation, I'll circulate it around and you'll just have the context. So they identified 3 goals at the select board for fiscal 22. The first goal was relative to comprehensive communication. And I actually thought this might be super helpful to us as a board. So the goal itself is to really have town hall provide more support to committees, including theirs relative to communication. both in terms of inbound communication support from residents, but also probably more importantly to us, outboard communication. And when we did our annual update, one of the things that we talked about was the fact that communication has kind of lagged, and it's always that next thing on the to-do list that doesn't seem to be ever enough time for. And yet it's something that's going to be super important going forward as we kind of build from 5 initiatives to 10 and we get some momentum around actual decisions. So I don't know exactly how this is going to take life, but I support the concept of having a kind of communication structure that's known by the committees and known by town hall and can be leveraged by the committees in terms of helping get outbound information about what we're doing at Master Plan Implementation Committee or what we're doing at Elm Street or what we're doing at zoning, without the committee itself having to kind of recreate the structure and the mechanism to do that. So, and Tim, I assume that that's something that Harbor and Chip would love to leverage too.
Absolutely. And, I'm thinking that there are many ways we as a community communicate. And I've tried many of them. I've tried the Facebook, and that gets confused and gets a lot of people engaged who really don't understand what's going on. So that probably is not going to work. I wonder if having a weekly email to go out to all committee members, I mean, as a blast that just communicates the different issues that we're all dealing with.
Yeah.
And it would seem to me that somebody could pull that together pretty easily, either from the minutes of the committee meetings or just the members. I mean, I'd be happy to contribute what's going on with the harbor and put it into one blast that went out.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure what the perfect answer is, but I totally support communication. We have a lot of things going on in the harbor, and it's not communicated well, without any question.
And again, it's not that the intent isn't to communicate. It's just, as you said, like you spend all your time on kind of actions and doing, and then finding the time to write the communication and then figure out the right mechanism to blast it out under that, encourages the right kind of dialogue. So I like the idea of a newsletter that's kind of an inter-committee newsletter that people can put blurbs in. I have no idea what shape this is going to take. So I'm going to be listening to see what the select board finalizes around this. And Lauren, I hope you can keep us updated around what this really means in terms of like actual channels and how we could be leveraging it. So if you can keep your ears to the ground, that'd be helpful. The second goal ties directly to our recommendation relative to land use. So we had, a recommendation in our annual update around land use focus, but also continued focus on the work of the comprehensive zoning redraft and reorganization that the zoning bylaw working group is working on. So goal number 2 really takes that and says that the select board is supporting that comprehensive redraft, but then also tying into the fact that we are beginning work relative to a harbor plan and scoping a village revitalization project. So tying into some major land use issues, some of it being zoning and other of it being land use in terms of how do we implement the harbor plan, and how do we begin to scope the village revitalization project, which the economic task force recommended. So that's goal number 2. And then goal number 3, again, ties into a recommendation that we made at our annual update for one of the year 2 plus priorities, which was supporting a broader public facilities and capital planning process, which included, public input and consensus, but also identifying those funding options. And that really is the genesis, is that we've got town hall that's going to come before us again for the 4th time. We now have the school facilities committee up and running, and that's going to generate requests. And then beyond that, there are sort of these lingering desires in the community to address public safety and harbor master facilities, plus. So without that comprehensive plan, we're going to continue to struggle in order to get consensus around who goes first and where's the funding coming from. So they seized upon that. And frankly, that is really something that I think the select board is uniquely, along with capital budget, positioned to drive. And so our goal there would be to support them. So those were the three goals. I didn't go back and review how they did against their fiscal 21 goals, but we've got three new ones, and I like the way that they've kind of fell in line with things that the master plan implementation committee could leverage or use.
Well, I think, Katie, it's nice. It all reads well. The last part of the goal number 2 is supporting the harbor plan. Although some of you may have heard that I met with the town manager and talking about the resiliency of the harbor and improving the infrastructure of the harbor to prevent the flooding of the town with the climate change and sea level rising. And the town manager told me specifically that the select board had no political interest in addressing the seawalls in the harbor, period. So I sent that letter out, and I said the town manager has informed me that the select board has no interest in improving the resiliency of the harbor.
Yep.
I have since gotten some input, as you can imagine, from that. So I think there will be some movement to bring together the people who are interested in protecting the town from the inevitable sea level rise and storm surge that will, if we don't do anything, will ultimately destroy a lot of the properties along Elm Street and down through into the town. So that may come, but so far it's a lot of tweeting. Yes, Lauren, you have a comment. Thank you.
This topic, you would be happy to know, is on my agenda this week, and I'm actually planning to meet with just a preliminary discussion with Carrie and Chris tomorrow. So we will have more to come on this soon, but I've already corresponded with a couple of residents and elected officials on this. So we will be addressing this topic, and like I said, more to come soon.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
That's what I hoped would happen.
Yeah, and I think when we did put it as a year 2+ priority, and so it wasn't forgotten from that perspective, but it's a question of when do we have the bandwidth and the town hall capacity to begin to really put some energy against it specifically. And I think that's what you're calling for, Tim.
Yes, well, there are a couple of things that are happening. One is we could wait for the tidal surge and the floods to come, and then we'll all raise our hand and say, wait, we ought to do something about it. The other thing that's happening is that Uncle Joe is about to unleash several $1 trillion for infrastructure. And my only point is we should be ready. We should be shovel ready to accept that when it comes. Because it will come, and notwithstanding some objections from the good senator from West Virginia, but there will be a certain amount that will be coming, and we should be ready for it.
Yeah, and so I guess what I would say on this one is, my understanding just from the emails that I was sort of CC'd on was that there is we're headed, Lauren, towards like a summit meeting of some type between Harbor, CHIP, AEC, Select Board, probably planning, and perhaps Master Plan Implementation Committee in terms of like how we begin to focus in on what the town needs to do specifically under addressing seawalls and sea level rise. And so is that a correct reflection, Lauren? Is in terms of where we're headed?
Yes. I will say that, yes, it is, we are planning to some sort of summit. How that's going to be shaped, like I said, this is yet to be determined. I have a conversation coming up tomorrow. But also, I think, as like an educational piece, is that there are some items that have been working towards, and that there's grants we've been tracking, and Tim mentioned the federal funding. There have been discussions taking place at town hall, about like preparing for that and things like that. And those are the kind of things that I think also highlight and intertwine back into the communication piece, is that there are some conversations and plans in the works, but maybe those need to be better communicated. So I see this as being a two-pronged thing, but yes, the short answer is that is something that we will be working on.
Okay. Well, it feels like, the good news is that there's multiple committees that have a stake in this, whether it's AEC, whether it's CHIP and Harbor, whether it's Master Plan Implementation Committee, or it's the Planning Board. Amy, I know that you've seen some of this come before your board. So there certainly are multiple stakeholders. It's more about coordinating that instead of having all those different committees start running with scissors. And so I think that was really the genesis, was to try and get those committees together and have a coordinated discussion around who's going to work on what, because there's plenty to go around, as Tim has suggested, in terms of work on this issue. And it's all being ready, hopefully, for grant funding at some point. Okay. Well, I did want to share with folks, I did, and I sent around with the minutes. I did this mostly for myself, kind of just a little tracking spreadsheet around what does Master Plan Implementation Committee broadly have on its to-do list for the fall. So maybe this is just an opportune time to kind of quickly run through this, and then we can jump into an update, more specifically on some of these. But just to kind of, in terms of what I know, and Lauren and others, if I'm missing something that you think is important, shout it out. But in terms of grant funding, to my knowledge, there's two big grants that are coming in or we'll know our status in October. One is for the comprehensive zoning redraft, and the second is the Elm Street Quarter engineering funding. Tim, on the Seaport Economic Council, were there grants that were submitted?
Yes. There was
Okay.
one granted for Parker Avenue. There's another one that's in process for the Government Island Pier.
Okay.
We haven't heard. Parker Avenue was granted. I think we have that. Now we have to find the matching funds. Lauren, I don't know if we've found the matching funds yet for that, but that I think CPC may chip in for some of that. So I think Parker Avenue is on its way. I think the Government Island pier and dock system is still pending.
Okay. Pending submission.
Yeah.
So we haven't submitted the grant, but when we submit the grant, we'll hear back from the Seaport.
Well, I think we've submitted for part of it.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure. This has been a work in progress, and so
Okay.
I'm not exactly where that stands. But I think we're moving forward on that one.
Okay. All right. So I will update this, but we've got the Parker Avenue submitted, and the grant has been granted, which is fantastic. Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. Lauren, do you know anything about matching funds on that? Is that going to come up as part of special town meeting, or are we going to figure out a way to do that through the AAR? Is it P?
I'm not sure about the answer to that question, but I'll check in with either Dawn or Michelle tomorrow, and I can get back to you on that.
Okay. All right. Because there is that America Recovery Act money that is currently available. My understanding is that there is, I looked at the notes. I think there's 700,000 that's actually in the town's hands currently as it relates to the America Recovery Act. And based on our population and our percent of county America Recovery Act funds, we should get close to another million, but that isn't in our hot little hands yet. So we have $700,000, and that can be spent on, my understanding is it largely related to infrastructure related projects, which obviously the Parker Avenue ramp could qualify. But I know there's a couple places where that $700,000 have claims on it. So the village revitalization being one of them. And if for some reason the community for One Stop for Growth grant doesn't come through, this one referenced above, we might need to dip into that for the engineering for Elm Street Quarter. So the good news is we have $700,000 in our bank account. The bad news is always that there's a bunch of projects that we may need to use it on. In terms of other funding that I know of, in terms of requests, just to kind of keep for a special town meeting, there were two that I knew of. One was out of one-time expense for the other half of the comprehensive zoning redraft work. So there would be a request for $75,000. Tim, on the funding for Captain's Walk for the conceptual graphics, when I last talked to Chris, he seemed to think that it may not even need to rise to special town meeting level. But I'm keeping it on the list until that gets resolved.
Well, that's good. Keep it on the list. The concern that I have is that the Captain's Walk will be on top of the seawalls for a large part of its journey from the Oaks to Government Island.
Yep.
So it makes little sense to start doing a lot of work on the Captain's Walk until we have a resolution of whether we're going to raise the seawalls to protect the village. I mean, I think the seawalls have to come first, or at least at the same time. So that's kind of what I'm wrestling with, to try and coordinate those things.
Well,
Can I comment on this one?
Yeah.
So I've spoken with Don and Chris about the portion of the Captain's Walk that for surveying, which will be property line survey data, and there's a couple of other things that may come with that scope, but we have the funding in place for that. We just need a sort of approval by the select board, which I anticipate at their next meeting. So we will begin with that, and that portion of Captain's Walk data will be relevant not only for planning of Captain's Walk purposes, but also doing the detailed research about who owns what, and that will help us also in terms of our seawall discussions, so that we know exactly which part of the seawalls and which portions are, belong to the town, and that we can, proceed with some sort of project
Great.
for that. So that'll be useful information for multiple reasons, and that is something that we know is coming. And once I get the green light, then we're ready to begin with that. So
Okay, well, that's great. We're on the same page, Lauren. That's terrific.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my understanding that part of this, though, the $5,000 was also to begin work around the conceptual, i.e. what could this look like? So that I hear you loud and clear, Tim, that obviously when it gets built, we need to know what it's being built on. And but in terms of the conceptual, it does feel to me like there is the ability, and this is one where partnership with the Historical Commission seems really important in terms of like reconceptualizing what the walk could be. And you could move forward with the conceptual without knowing whether your seawall is going to be at,
We have, and that is moving forward. The conceptual portion of it's moving forward. In fact, I'm planning to meet with the Marblehead Harbor Master on Friday. And discuss what they're doing up there with their harbor and the harbor walks they have. I mean, a lot of the agenda is long because it includes the lift system, the conveyor system they have, and so forth, and governance of the harbor. But the harbor walk is one, and we've had a number of people that have looked at what it might be when it's all done, and the historical Commission has been involved. Jackie Dormister has been actively involved in that discussion. So no question. The other thing I can tell you is the property owners, the private property owners around the harbor are very much interested in the historical aspect of their properties and the harbor or the captain's walk that goes around. So everybody is engaged in this conversation. We just have to make sure that it all gets coordinated so we don't do the last piece before the first piece is done.
Yeah. No, I hear you, but I'm gonna keep this $5,000 on there because I think
Great.
you had two requests. One was money for the survey, and it sounds like that's being sorted. And then the second was $5,000 for the conceptual graphics. So we'll keep it on the list, and
That's great.
we'll
That's great. And I'm going to rely on Lauren to spend it as appropriate.
The other thing that I knew was coming up around special town meeting was 3 zoning articles, which I'll update you guys on a little bit later. And then the only other thing I knew was that funding for Elm Street Quarter engineering could come on special town meeting if the grant fell through in some way, shape, or form. We won't know until October, beginning of October. But I guess my question for you, Lauren, is I don't think we don't need to put in a notice of intent around that funding. I guess my concern is that right now we're assuming we're getting the grant, but I'm not sure if it falls through, is the matching money going to come from free cash flow, which I understand is pretty tighter this year. It was only around $1 million. It wasn't trending to $1.5 million plus. Or were we going to use this America Recoveries Act? So I want to keep it on the list so we don't lose sight of it until this October grant deadline passes and we sort of know our true standing on that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if we need to put a placeholder in for annual town meeting, we will, but I will also have a conversation, like I said, with Dawn and try to get some guidance on that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So we have a plan B.
Yeah, I'd feel better, just like you're suggesting, if Don had it on his radar screen so that it was in there as kind of a bracketed item, perhaps with no number, but it might need to have a number populated against it depending on what happens with the grant.
Just don't take it out of the OPEB fund.
No, God, no, Tim. Exactly. We'll work Don on that angle either. So anyway, and then in terms of, we have our ongoing year 1 priorities, which I think which we'll talk about in a second. And then in terms of year 2 priorities, just to refresh everybody's memory, these were the 5 that we added: sidewalk plan and 3A improvements, which we're going to deep dive on in a minute. Land use focus, climate adaptation and sea level rise, which we just touched on, comprehensive public facility plan, which I'm happy to say the select board has really taken that on and put that in their goals for fiscal 22. And then around historical preservation, it really comes down to the Captain's Walk renovation and have Fisherman's Well on here, Julia, just because we know that when the intersection on Elm Street gets redesigned, there's an opportunity to perhaps upgrade.
Enhance, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So
one thing, Julia, have you been involved in the Elm Street conversation on the design of Elm Street and what happens down there by the?
Only in as much as I've attended meetings and somewhat participated, but not, not to any great extent.
It certainly would be helpful to have somebody engaged in that, because I don't want to just approve or raise my hand and approve a design for Elm Street that wipes out the Fisherman's Well. So,
well, I think since it was something we just did, there's sort of a, I don't know. I think the Historic Commission does care about it. I would not like to see it overlooked in a redevelopment.
Okay. I'm sure there are ways to deal with it. It's just that somebody has to pay attention to it, and I'll do the best I can to pay attention.
Well, should I seem to be the liaison person, so.
Well, let's talk talk Elm Street Quarter next? Because maybe this will be helpful for you, Julia, because I think there's going to be some specific dates that if you or someone else from the Historical Commission are plugged into.
Yeah,
we'll
that
surely-
I can do that. It's just, as I say, my physically, I'm not good. I can't drive and I'm having my shoulders replacement in a month.
Ouch,
I'm happy to,
Julia.
yeah,
Oh, no.
yeah, but I'm
Oh,
happy to do stuff. I'm gonna be sitting around. So,
All right, well. I'll do the best
actually
I can to
reclining
stay,
around, I guess, for
I'll
6
keep
weeks.
you posted as we go through it.
Yeah,
Julia, I'm even happy to keep you in the loop, and even if we want to have a Zoom meeting where we review it with you, if you can't attend whatever session, we can
Yeah.
certainly, I'll put it on my
As I
list.
say, I'm
Okay,
willing to give my all to this town, so.
Okay.
thank you.
Amy, nice to see you.
yeah.
Welcome.
Yes.
Hi, Amy.
I didn't realize that you were the class of 1920, what is it, 1922?
1922.
yes.
I know, it's like
You-
the
You
last
were
class.
holding up well.
All right, so we kind of segued already into the Elm Street corridor. And Lauren, maybe I just literally just copied and pasted the note that you sent out to the working group. So I thought maybe you could walk us through what's going on with Elm Street. And there are some key dates and things happening. So I really wanted this group to be aware so that, as many of us could attend and listen and input.
Yes, certainly. Thank you. So the latest with Elm Street, what we did throughout the summer was we tried to take a step back and really try to get more community input. What we had heard at our last forum in June, I felt we needed to not entirely go back to the drawing board, but sort of pivot and get some new information about what people liked and didn't like, and just try to, get some more input. We had a survey out through the month of August that we got a lot of great feedback from. I had a focus group with some of the business owners in the village, and I heard from residents. I had visits from people. So I do think that we got a lot more feedback over the summer than we had an opportunity for in previous iterations. So what we did at our last Elm Street Quarter working group was we heard sort of our consultants give a presentation about what they received from the survey input. I shared what I had learned, and everybody sort of had an opportunity to input the input that we had heard from other folks in the community. And with that input in mind, the group then took a look at the different sort of configuration options and sort of narrowed out what the group is sort of leaning towards the best recommendation, sort of a consensus opportunity to approach this project as a next step. So what we have decided is the next immediate steps. First, we need to sort of fine tune some of the roadway calculations in the centerpiece. So, as I'm sort of referring to this as like a noodle session where we just have to crunch the numbers with some of the engineers. So we're half the group who are really design savvy will be meeting with these engineers to sort of make sure that those numbers really make sense and that we're not doing anything that is, the opposite of what was intended. After that is, sorry?
That noodle session corridor.
You cut out for a minute, I'm sorry.
All right. That noodle session on the really specific, that's on the corridor itself,
Yes, so the
80 feet or whatever it is width.
Yes, what we were looking at the last time is that in the actual right of way, that's town property, it does it's wider than the current roadway layout, and what we don't want to do is to have any impact on or minimal impact on people's what appears to be their front lawns right now, particularly with sensitivity towards the south side of Elm Street, because many years ago there had been sort of a taking that they had lost some property there, so they were sensitive of that. We were looking at sort of the way that the plans that we were looking at now and realized that we need to retweak some of these things so that we're not encroaching on the right of way that currently in its today's state appears to be someone's front lawn. So that's why we're trying to fine tune that so that we're not impacting people's properties like that. So that will be sort of just real nitty gritty on that piece of it. And then we will return to Elm Street Quarter working group, just to make sure that everyone is in agreement with the sort of final product that will be presented then in a public forum setting. And then after that public forum, the plan is to return to the select board that originally charged this group with this task to sort of deliver the final, here's what we heard, this is what our recommendation was, and this is how the public forum went.
Okay. So oh, sorry, I'm cutting in and out. Is it scratchy on your end?
Not currently.
Okay, good. All right. So the quarter, you're reworking some of the figures there. Is the intersection options, are those pretty clear? I mean, again, there was the quarter, which is the long connector between the harbor and the village, and then there was the intersection, which is that junction, which there were opportunities and design issues associated with CHI in terms of how they're placing their building. So is the intersection design more finished right now?
Yeah, so what will be put forth in the sort of, we're calling it option 3. They had previously had 2 alternatives, but as we looked at them, it could have sort of been composed in any different, the 2 intersections could have had multiple options. It was, and the residential section really had a couple of sort of options that you could pick. So now in the 3rd option, it will be sort of the happy medium. This is the recommendation of the working group. The configuration of Brook Street will remain the same. They had been looking and exploring the option of one ways. That's not something that's going to be recommended.
Okay.
The residential section, like I said, we're doing some fine tuning. It will involve wider sidewalks, increased pedestrian access, putting in crosswalks, making sure everything is sort of ADA accessible and compliant. It at this stage will not include a dedicated bike lane, as we heard a lot of residents were really concerned about that impact on the residential neighborhood. So the layout will include better improved pedestrian access and safety features, but it won't be a specific designated bike lane. And then the biggest change, in my opinion, is at the harbor edge in that intersection there. The new proposal will sort of eliminate Cove Road and turn that area into a contiguous park area. And then it will come and sort of, you'll have a 3-way stop so that all the traffic will come to a stop at that intersection where it currently sort of branches around that piece of triangle grass right now.
Okay. Thank you for that additional context.
Oh, and then in addition, I'm sorry, as we just think about that intersection that I was just speaking about, if you follow it south towards the Veterans Memorial Park, there's also improvements to come there that will make that crosswalk significantly safer, and we'll also put in 2 designated handicap accessible spaces sort of right kitty corner in front of the Veterans Hall right now. So
Okay.
there's some improvements that also bend down a little bit that way as well.
Got it.
I'll just
Lauren,
add a
can I
couple of,
ask you, did they
couple of
study
things.
that? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Is somebody talking? I just add a couple of things. One is the everything, all the designs, whatever design we come up with, will preserve the view corridor to the harbor down Elm Street. So as you come down Elm Street, that view corridor, which is now blocked by the Cohasset Harbor Inn, will open up, and that will be maintained. The other thing we've spent a lot of time on is whether there should be one way on the north end of Elm Street around the village. And I think, Lauren, if I'm correct in my memory, we decided that probably it's best to just leave it as is for now until we deal with the issue of parking in the village, which is really the big bugaboo if you were to change that to one way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we decided it's best to leave it as is and not make it one way.
Right, that's correct. As we were looking at the circulation potential to create a one-way, it wound up causing more problems than it was solving. So, after weighing the different sort of options and seeing what that might result in, we realized that, while we recognize that parking was one of the main concerns there, this is not going to be the solution that solves that issue. So, right, as Tim indicated, we, after weighing the options and taking a look at the potential, it was just best to recommend that we do pedestrian improvements at that edge, but leave the configuration as is.
And it feels to me like since there is going to be a conversation starting about the village revitalization, that we have almost a second bite at that apple in terms of if we want to tweak things based on, as Tim was saying, what we do relative to parking in the village or other things in the village, we have an opportunity. Almost pre-designing it now might block us from doing some things later that we decide are important as part of that project. So I think that makes sense. Amy, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if when they were thinking about having the one side of Elm Street one way, was that checked out in terms of what the traffic consequence would be?
It's just Brook Street at the top, Amy.
Okay,
It wasn't all of Elm Street. It was literally that little section, Brook Street by Fleming's, I think, that little weird triangle that you kind of sometimes, if you're looking for parking, you go around that, around the
Yeah.
horn.
yep.
Yeah. All right. So if I'm correct, Lauren, what I have highlighted here are the dates that our committee needs to be aware of. So Julia, it's public forum number 3, which is
Okay.
either going to be on October 4th, or which is a Monday, or Thursday, October 7th. And then it sounds like the select board presentation is going to be on the 19th.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of shape I'll be in for that, but
Okay.
I could certainly do that public forum. But what do you want? Do you want me to, Tim, you were saying, should I do, as here I am the liaison from the Historic Commission to this commission, so then go on to do the Elm Street Quarter so that we all know what's going on with that loop? Or
Well, I think that whatever we come up with or whatever we decide on, and the public forum will show this.
yeah,
It just makes sure that any of the historical issues are
address,
addressed.
yeah.
I would
No,
suggest
I'm happy.
as well,
I'm happy to. Yeah, happy to attend.
so, and I can reach out to you as well in advance of the public forum, just to sort of walk you through and take a look at things in a smaller settings, so that you're not just in a forum having to think about your thoughts and how the historic commission might report back.
Thank you.
Another thing to keep in mind is that at our last Elm Street Quarter working group, we also talked about the potential for the group to have recommendations other than the configuration and roadway layout. For example, one of the things that kept getting brought up is, more enforcement in the corridor. That's not something that we're going to see in a plan, but we can sort of report that back to the select board. And one of the things that can be sort of a verbal recommendation, even if it's not shown in this plan set yet, is how the the captain's walk might be where, however it plugs in, or if there's a recommendation or something that comes as a next phase 2, we can include that as well. So we want to have your input on that.
Yeah, right now we're just working on the wording of the signage.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so it sounds like perhaps a one-on-one with Julia after maybe the next Elm Street Quarter working group, and then Julia, you being able to, with that background knowledge that Lauren can get you attending the public forum at the beginning of October, that would be great. And then whoever is available, I think attending the final presentation to the select board will be helpful. Lauren, the Elm Street Quarter working group is a master plan implementation working group. Is it going to help that the broader master plan implementation committee signed off on it or gave a harumph for a vote or an endorsement of some type? So I guess it's a question for you to ponder whether ultimately before you go to the select board, do you want an endorsement? Or is that sort of presumed because it is a working group of the master plan implementation committee?
Katie, I'm sorry, my internet cut out for a bit while you were speaking there. I just came back.
I was asking
I was
asking whether a master plan implementation committee endorsement would be helpful when you go before select board, or is that kind of overkill because the working group itself is a working group of master plan.
That's a good question. And let me think that over a bit, and I can talk to the working group about that, and then I will circle back to you.
Okay. Again, I have personally felt very connected to the Elm Street Quarter working group, just between the updates that I've been getting here from you and Tim and my ability to attend kind of the public forums. I don't feel like I've been out of step with the work. But again, to the extent that an endorsement could be useful, let us know.
Okay, thank you.
And then, so that was Elm Street Corridor, which I'm excited. I mean, this is like one of our year one implementation priorities, which is kind of coming to, conclusion, at least of phase one, has funding resources that are lined up that we'll know the final status of in October. And then from there we go, assuming that we can get agreement around the design and we've got funding for the engineering, we're on the path to execution actually of something, which is exciting. And then, unfortunately, I'm going to go through the ugly bird phase first when they tear up the roads to do the sewer and the water pipes. But once that work is done, hopefully we'll get to the pretty stuff on the other end. So the next update on the agenda was the zoning bylaw working group. And I'm going to bring up just kind of a work plan that we put together for the fall. And I'll make this quick because you guys have heard a bunch of this already. But we have kind of three work streams. One is special town meeting. We have 3, possibly 4 zoning articles. Plus we have some public hearings on some regulations that we're recommending to the planning board. That's kind of work product number 1. Work product number 2 is around engaging a consultant and the public forums and consensus building. So this is around the comprehensive zoning redraft. We obviously have the grant that's pending. Assuming we get that grant and assuming we get the additional funding from special town meeting, the idea would be to combine those 2 pools of funding and hire a third-party consultant to help with the marketing and the public forums associated with the content of the broader comprehensive zoning redraft. And then the third piece of work is just the zoning redraft and reorganization itself. And we've been chunking away at pieces of that, but ultimately we have to take the recommendations and the research and the benchmark we've done and turn it into actual zoning articles themselves. Ultimately, all of this goes before town meeting. It's just that in my mind, obviously the special town meeting stuff is on a timeline that the work needs to be completed by December. The timeline for the consulting, hiring the consultant and that process is sort of November, December. And then frankly, the comprehensive redraft and reorganization, although we'll be working on it this fall, is going to take us deep into 2022 realistically. So there's not going to be an unveiling of a comprehensive redraft until I would say second half of 2022 is kind of where I'm at. So that's the zoning bylaw working group. In terms of the 3 articles themselves, I think we need to get through a conversation with the planning board next week in terms of, we had originally proposed 6. And after discussion and listening to the planning board, we've kind of rescoped that down to 3. 1 in terms of the single lot exemption, 2nd around some residential access definitions, and the 3rd around ledge protection. So we need to do that first, and then I'll update the committee in October when we know exactly what the three articles are going to look like, and I'll give you kind of a global view on what all that means and why we've made those recommendations for a special town meeting. So that's the zoning bylaw working group. I'll pause there and see if people have questions on that. All right. Amy and Lauren, is there anything else that we need to sort of be thinking about from the zoning bylaw working group? I guess my real question to you, Amy, is I think there's a natural way for our working group to stay connected with the planning board in terms of the special town meeting stuff. Like there's public hearings, and you guys are the board that runs those 40A public hearings. When it comes to the kind of broader comprehensive redraft and reorganization, that's one where I'm looking for ways to stay connected to the planning board so that we have you bought in step by step. And I actually realized, at some point soon, we should probably have a meeting between the select board, the planning board, and the zoning bylaw working group to really all agree on what it is that we're doing with the comprehensive redraft and reorganization. Like, what is this going to mean in terms of timeline? What is this going to mean in terms of the more content-oriented changes versus what is it going to mean in terms of the more organizational changes, and kind of lay that out for your board and also the select board, because you guys are going to be riding shotgun with us on all this work. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, it does, but I would say that in light of how we need to be strategic about town meeting, and we need to be socializing the issues now that we plan to bring before the public. I think it's probably valuable to say that every other meeting that the planning board has, that there be an update on what's going on and how things are going. Because I feel like, whereas Tom really knows a lot, everybody else knows actually very little. And Clark knows about Elm Street, and he's very clear about his opinion as it relates to the discussions about the actual design of the changes to the bylaw. And I think we need to continually have conversations, and they have to be socialized, because it right now, from the standpoint of where we stand, is 3 people are not deeply engaged, 3 people are deeply engaged. And I think that's not a good number. I think it should be all 6 should be engaged, and they need to understand it, and they need to be able to talk about it, and they need to be supportive of it. And so the only way for that to happen is by reoccurring visits. Okay.
All right. Well, we can take this offline, but I appreciate that feedback, because it's kind of been rattling around my head also as to how we build more cohesion at the planning board level around this. And I do think that there are, as you said, kind of 2 populations in some ways that we're talking to on your board, and we need to figure out ways to engage both.
Yeah. And I also think, I don't know whether this is possible for us to do, but I think that we need to have a sign campaign. And I think we also need to, like, we think of ourselves as going, while the public hearings will be one thing, I think of Jean Dippold's campaign, and she walked all over the place and spoke to 800 people, so that when the time came, everybody knew what she stood for. And I think that this is going to be important for people I think we have to put in time to socialize it, and beyond the board, actually.
Right. And I guess that's part of why, in my mind, Amy, hiring this consultant to help us with that campaign is so important.
Yeah, for sure.
you know, the quantity or the quantity of special town meeting articles, I think we've now scoped it down to kind of what is achievable in that kind of 2-month window. But I absolutely agree that, you know, part of the reason I've been pushing for the hiring of a consultant is exactly around that consensus building, that public forums, getting the word out around, you know, I don't want people to have to read the Bible, but I want them to know the 10 commandments of like, why are we doing the zoning redraft and what is it going to entail and why should it matter to you? You know, the 10 commandment version, not the, you know, 500 page, you know, James Bible version, you know, so.
I totally agree with that. And I actually, you know, as a result of the experience in a region in town where some things took place that were in front of the planning board for numerous times, people have come forward to me and said they would like to help in the campaign. So
Okay.
I can go back to them, and you know, there were probably 6 or 7 of them that were particularly engaged. And so I think we can rely on, try to get them involved, and you know, they can put signs up, they can put leaflets out, and so I think that's important. I think another thing is that we should be talking to our allied boards that are not actually town boards, like the Straits Pond Watershed Association. That's one group. There's another group that's there. I'll get a list of these organizations that are around town, and I'm sure you know them, and I'm sure Tim knows some of them. Everybody on this call knows some, and we need to reach out to them and have them help us.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's a lot of footwork that has to happen. And I think in terms of like, I think if we can evangelize first to the folks who want to listen, like the people that you said have, you know, shown up at hearings or had issues in the past, you know, getting them to understand what we're proposing is going to then just, you know, make it easier to have them help us in the broader communication. So that's again, I am fully on board with that as a strategy in terms of like the consensus building that this is going to take, and it's beyond just the board. But I first need to get your board and the select board to kind of agree on this is what it is, and then we can begin the evangelization process as we have a consultant on board.
Yeah, I think that it's also really important that the talking points are very consistent. And I do feel as if right now it's either not clear, we're clear, but not everyone is clear, and it's not consistent. And I do think that we have small circle coordination, bigger circle that we have to actually sort of undertake.
Yep. Okay. I appreciate the feedback. I've been feeling the same in terms of the complexity of linking all this together so that it builds in a crescendo instead of chords that are in disharmony. So,
Excuse me, Katie, could I leave just so I can catch the end of the Historic Commission?
yeah, no, I appreciate, thank you for coming, Julia.
No, it's just, you guys are more interesting. I should put in an appearance.
Okay.
So do I have to say that I
What about your
adjourn?
surgery?
I'll put it down there. You know, I officially adjourn. Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you, Julia. All right, thanks.
Did she
So-
say she's getting a shoulder replaced?
Yeah, she's having a shoulder repair done. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because replace and repair are.
Two different things. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it falls in the repair category. So next up on the agenda was downtown village revitalization, and I just really wanted to circle back. You know, Tim, I know you had circulated some emails about parking. And this relates to parking both on the harbor, but also parking in the village. when I met with Carrie, Chris, and Lauren after our select board presentation, we kind of went through all of the implementation priorities. And when it came to downtown village revitalization, we know that we need to do a better job of defining the scope of the project and really defining a vision for what we mean in terms of village revitalization. We have projects that are starting to come before the planning board. Some have already come and some are about to come. And so we know that there is an opportunity to reshape the village based on what developers are already considering, plus what we could do as a community. But we don't really have, I would say, sort of a tip of the spear in terms of driving all of this into a singular vision. And so when we talked about it with Carrie and Chris afterwards, their suggestion was that we first start with some stakeholders. And Eric Potter, Amy volunteered when we presented the master plan implementation priorities to be the stakeholder representing the planning board for village revitalization. So I know that 3 of your 6 members heard that. I don't think that all 6 of your 6 members heard that. So if there's a way for you to, you and Lauren to update the planning board to let them know that there are conversations beginning about village revitalization. It was based on the recommendation that the master plan implementation committee made, and that from the planning board, Eric is going to be representing. I think that would be helpful just to kind of underscore that so that people remember that. And then from the town side, it's going to be it's going to be Lauren. And from the select board side and economic council side, it's going to be Corey Evans. From master plan, I was going to attend. If anybody wants to attend, they're more than welcome. And I guess, Tim, I'll raise the question. I mean, there is ultimately some connectivity between the two, but I think you've got quite the full plate right now in terms of meetings.
I would prefer not to add another committee.
Okay.
But on the parking, you mentioned the parking. The only thing that I would say is that I think somebody or some group should look at parking in the town of Cohasset. There is technology available that would certainly help in the process. As an example, we have limited parking in the village. We have contractors that park there all day, and that's unnecessary. We have ways that we can deal with that in a very nice, polite way that will achieve the objectives that we want for the village, and yet still provide parking for people that want to come and park for the whole day and do whatever they're going to do. So that's all I will say with that. Hopefully somewhere along the line, somebody will address that, because I think there is a solution that would work. And that includes the harbor as well. There are things we need to do in the harbor for parking, and we will.
Okay.
Can I add to that, as a patron of one of the downtown hairdressing places, someone there talked to me about how the real estate people always park there, and then they shouldn't, and the hairdressers, there's a whole bunch of people. It's not just contractors parking there all day. It's people that work there. So what are they, they've got to be able to go somewhere.
Yes, exactly. And there are solutions to that.
And
There
that
are
diagonal
absolutely
parking, excuse me, but the diagonal parking with all these ginormous vehicles now.
I know.
It's just, it makes me think of, the old measurement for a parking space in London was the size of a Mercedes Benz.
I
But
know.
no, obviously no longer, but we can't have that angled. Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
You know me, I keep
I'm
going
with
on.
you. I'm with you.
Yeah,
Yeah, the average vehicle in Cohasset versus the average vehicle in other.
Yeah.
I think if you want-
Right.
Okay, so I just wanted, more than anything else, I just wanted to let people know that there was kind of a starting point happening. This is not by any means the ending point, but there was a starting conversation happening this month between Corey, myself, Eric Potter, Lauren, and Chris. Did I miss anybody? I think that was our starting point. I think so. And we will be reporting back to all of our various committees, and also report back to Master Plan Implementation Committee. But again, this is another thing where the planning board is seeing hearings and development. And I think the other thing that Corey brought to the table again was that there's the America Recovery Act dollars that are out there, and there are some infrastructure components to the village revitalization project where, like you've been saying, Tim, being shovel ready is helpful. So that's village revitalization. Jen and Lauren, it'd be great to hear on affordable housing.
Jen, I don't want to steal your thunder.
No, I was actually going to give you some kudos. I was just going to say that I thought your write-up was really excellent. I had, having been to many of these meetings and having seen the 40B analysis and talked through it many, many times, I just wanted to direct everyone to the document that you put together, because I thought it really pulled everything together really nicely and kind of showed our pipeline really well. So
thank you.
And I guess I read that. I'm trying to find it now.
Are we going to meet our requirements for the next census? Or
Certainly for the next. No, so that actually, so yes, I put together a memo, and this actually came out of a result of a conversation with sewer commissioners trying to understand particularly the site of 390 Chief Justice Cushing Highway and sort of how the affordable housing piece fit in. So yeah, so this is the memo I put together specifically just about affordable housing. And you'll see that it's tough to say until we have the census numbers, the specific census numbers that we need to calculate SHI, I should say. We know that based on 2017 numbers, when we were looking through the housing production plan and doing this data analysis, that we will need at least 25 more deed restricted affordable housing units on our SHI to meet that, stay over our 10%. The exact number, of course, we'll recalculate when we have that information. The census release data, I will say, it was pushed back for a bit, and then now it's being released in sort of pieces. So we have certain numbers out, but the actual figures that they use to calculate SHI, they don't have a date to be released yet. So when I last spoke with DHCD and the people who sort of stay on top of the recalculation and the census data, they're sort of anticipating that it's going to be at least another year before we have that information. So that's sort of the good news in that it's not like we have a smoking deadline of September 30th before we all turn into pumpkins. It's not happening here. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is that we have 43 units that will be SHI eligible in the pipeline in some sort of approval or permitting stage. So that's also really good news, as we know over the next couple of years we're going to have a series of units coming online that, based on those units alone, we're very likely to reach our 10%, or if not reach our 10%, be eligible for a temporary safe harbor if we are able to certify our housing production plan. So there's a lot more information in here, but this just sort of just a summary, a snippet to boil down sort of where we are today and what's happening next. So Amy, you have a question?
That's great.
Could you just
It's almost half of
briefly
that.
mention what's going on at 390?
Sure. There's actually a separate memo that I'd be happy to distribute to all of you that accompanied this memo.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Is that fine? I'm interested if it's in there. Great. I'll read it.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. So it can't. You may not have gotten it, but if not, we'll distribute. And it came from John Hallen, and it outlines a punch list of about 13 items that they need to do before they are able to get their certificates of occupancy, which will be that ticket for us to get them counted on the SHI.
Okay.
Yeah,
Do
if you
they
don't mind circulating that would be helpful.
Yeah.
I had been tracking the sewer commission conversations because they were back in active negotiations with Stasco regarding the sewer connection. And Lauren, I don't know if they have finally voted on that or they're still in the tail end of negotiations. But the good news is that they were actively negotiating after a hiatus. But I haven't heard that it's been ratified.
I have not heard how that finally concluded. I just know that these memos were sort of put together in their final stages as they were looking to wrap this up, and I thought they were close to an agreement, but I don't have a confirmation for you.
Yeah, I actually, I think I saw it in my inbox earlier this week that there is a sewer commission meeting next week. So my guess is that we're close on wrap up ratification. But if you can circulate that memo, that'd be helpful. Amy, you
Yes.
had a question?
Yeah, well, actually, it's more a comment. I just supervised a master's thesis on 40B and the picture around the state in terms of towns complying with 40B requirements. And one of the things that was interesting in the findings is that by having a housing production plan, the state really takes a different approach or a view of communities, and that there's more forgiveness with that than without it. And so whatever happens to us, the fact that we have a demonstrated commitment to that extent actually is very important to enabling us to, essentially cope with the fact that we've got all these things stacked up, but some of them may not come, ready when the numbers they're looking for the numbers.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Amy, would your advisee be interested in letting you share that with me? I'd be really interested to
Oh,
look
yeah,
at it.
sure, I will. Yeah.
Okay. I was just going to ask really quick, Lauren, and I wasn't able to quite piece this together, but I guess two pieces. One is on 390 with the punch list and knowing what those items are. Do you have, obviously I know it can go in a lot of different directions, but is there an estimate of time to occupancy at this point? And then just wondering how that jives. I was looking at the different trajectories to how to get into the, whether we would satisfy, which it looks like not, whether we would get into the safe harbor. And it wasn't really clear to me with the delay of the data, whether they were expecting, some of these 1, 2, 3 year plans, is that counting from 2020? If they release the data in 2022, and the answer may be, I don't know, but if they release the data in 2022, is that going to be looking backward to have expected those thresholds to have been met over the years from 2020 forward, or do we get a restart on those timelines?
Right, I believe we're getting a restart on those timelines is my understanding of this. But I will
Great.
certainly circulate any information that I find to the contrary.
Okay. Sounds good.
So, Jen, if I'm following you correctly, you were asking whether our next target becomes 2030. Is that essentially what you were saying?
Not 2030, but so Lauren was kind of laying out a few different ways that the timeline, that our compliance met, and part of it is direct compliance, and the other piece is if we are eligible for the safe harbor and we're kind of marching toward compliance.
Gotcha.
And what I was trying to understand was the data is supposedly as of 2020. Under normal circumstance, it would be released more promptly. If it's not released until 2022, do those year 1, year 2, year 3 timelines, do they start from 2020 or do they start from the date of the release of the data? And so release of the data would be excellent. And then the other question is, what do we think the current timeline is given the new information on CJC? Because those two things are, if CJC has a hope of occupancy by early 2022, and we're not expected to get the data until mid 2022, that puts us in a really different position.
Yeah, exactly. That's sort of the perfect scenario that CJC completes and the data comes out after it, and we're safe harbor compliant. If it's the flip, then we're in that in between. I got you. Okay.
Exactly. So just wondering,
Jen, could I make a suggestion? Your questions are well crafted. and well put together, but you ask like or 3 questions with a question. And I'm finding it hard. You bring up so
Okay.
many points, but then by the end of the question, I'm like, okay, so please keep it up. But
I will parse them out. Sorry, Julia, very sorry. That means they probably are not well crafted. I will
no, they
pause.
are well, no, I'm saying they are. It's just that it's like a Beethoven symphony, and you keep going into crescendos, beautiful crescendos, and each one is valuable. So let's
I gotcha. So in terms of the 2020 census data, Lauren, I mean, I was kind of hoping that we'd have a picture, but from what you're suggesting, it's going to come out in dribbles and bits. You know, if you see a point where there is like enough information that's come out that it's interesting to add it to our agenda, let us know. But if it's coming out in bits and pieces, I guess I'd almost rather wait until the full data is available and analyze it then than try and like analyze the pieces.
Yeah, so I have, and I'm trying to dig through it now. I'll find it, but I have an email from one of the housing consultants at MAPC who sort of gives a snippet of sort of what's going on. But I don't have sort of a clear timeline about when we're going to get the crucial piece of information that they use to calculate SHI. So I just know it's some time off. And then to circle back to Jen's question about 390, it's really tough to answer because a lot of this is going to fall on how expeditiously the applicant moves through sort of the hurdles that he needs to get to the CFOs. If I had to give a reasonable estimate, we're at least a couple more months out.
Okay. Not much.
how could
I know it's
how
in
could
his
oh sorry.
actually.
I just wondered with what the bits and snippets I've heard about that building, how could they have started building it and built it without having any provision for water or sewerage?
So to make a very long story very short, this property, it was permitted, let's say a decade ago, to have first floor retail component. They came back and amended their permit to allow them to have the affordable unit piece on top. That triggered them into a different sort of permitting category. They, at the time, were given approval to have a septic system, but because that property and the 2 properties next to it, the Stop and Shop and the building with Feng Shui, they're separate properties, parcels, but they're all under common ownership. And that, because of that, exceeded the threshold that you're allowed to have for current septic standards. And that is why ultimately, once they were able to sort of prove the case that they were all under ownership, they were exceeded the threshold, and they sort of had to pull the Board of Health permit, and there's all sorts of other issues with that. So they originally were permitted with approved plans, and then as things sort of have been unfolding, there's been some setbacks, to put it simply.
Wow. And then they have to move all that dirt to do anything?
They have some site work still remaining to do.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things they actually, one of their pieces of their 12 pieces to completion left remaining is to return to planning board for site plan approval. So they have some substantial steps to go. That's why I say a few more months with a grain of salt. It's hard to guess, but it's not going to happen in the immediate future.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. And if you can circulate that John Hallen memo, that'd be helpful as background. And then I guess the last topic I wanted to cover tonight was 2 things. One is I wanted just to go through quickly with the group the 3A North documents, just so everybody was aware. And then I wanted to get committee buy-in around next steps associated with a sidewalk plan and a sidewalk funding source, because of the recommendations that we made, you know, really the sidewalks and transportation, as we've talked about in the past, it doesn't have a committee home. And so when it comes to transportation and circulation, we are kind of the committee home for those initiatives. And so I would love to get some agreement around a little work plan for us as a committee to tackle some of the transportation and circulation work over the next period of time, because absent us doing it as a committee and partnering with Brian Joyce and Jason Federico, it won't get done. So we're kind of the committee of record when it comes to transportation and circulation, because there isn't anybody else to match it with. So I thought I would start first with there were a couple memos, but basically it boiled down to two things on 3A North. To start the process of getting on the tip, two kind of baseline pieces of work had to be done, and the town hired tech engineering to do that. One is a public survey, and there was a memo dated from September on that. And then there is also a traffic evaluation that was done, which talks about car counts and turning and crashes and a whole bunch of statistics associated with that corridor. So I just wanted to quickly bring those up. I read through them in detail because that's what I do. My husband was looking at me really strangely. I was like, did you know? But I thought we could quickly go through that. And so that people, if you want to go back and look at it, you can. Jen, sounds like you took some time to poke around the information too, which is great. So I thought I'd start with the survey results. So this is the memo from September. And so there was a survey that was put out. I publicized it on the master plan Facebook page. It was on the town. I had it shared with 143. It was August, but there were 347 responses collected. And this is the breakdown in terms of the way they split in terms of either direct butters to that section of 3A North, which runs from basically the Stop and Shop Plaza, the intersection of Sawyer and 3A there, all the way through to the Mbta station. It's roughly a mile. I think it's like something like 5,500 feet in length. So there were abutters, there were residents of an intersecting side street, there were just the majority were just like Cohasset residents, and then a couple business owners responded. Lauren, my reaction on this was that it was a little, I'd love to figure out a way to get the business owner input up on this, because like we found with the Elm Street Quarter, if you don't engage them up front, they talk to you on the back end. So that was my only observation here in terms of the survey, participation. The rest of it felt really rounded, but the business owner part didn't. And I don't know if you've had any conversations with Brian or Jason on that.
That I have not, but
Okay.
I concur with your assessment there.
Okay. Well, I thought what we could do is kind of run through this, and if we had questions or observations, I could do up an email back to Jason and Brian, just letting them know that we reviewed it. And here's either the questions we had or comments we had. So that was one that I was going to throw on the list in terms of figuring out a way to get a little bit more business owner input at the start of the process. This was probably the most important chart, which is, in your opinion, what are the top 3 transportation improvements? And the 3 longest bars starting were at 66% agreement, were improved pedestrian accommodation and safety along this corridor. Second was improve bicycle accommodation and safety. And then third was facilitating access to abutting residential and commercial, which is, I think, about, the number of curb cuts that we have, especially in that first section where Dunkin' Donuts and Avalon collide. And then even there were some, if you read through the comments in the back, there was even some, things that I do, which is like, I'm coming out of Cohasset Pediatrics and I need to go left, I'll turn right and go down King Street and circle back left down North Main, because making a left there is next to impossible. So there were, facilitating access in terms of abutting residents and commercial was definitely something that it resonated with me. And then the other ones that came up were facilitating access to the MBTA rail station. I think this is really one that some of the businesses could perhaps comment further on in terms of what percentage of their employee populations use that as a mode of transport into work. And then reducing travel speeds. And then the last was facilitating access to recreational areas, which is this whole connectivity to the rail trail and Wampatuck. So those were the top 3 observations in terms of improvements. There was a whole series of questions. Walking comfort along 3A, not surprisingly, 80% of respondents said they were extremely uncomfortable walking along 3A. I don't think I actually have done it only when I've needed to pick up a rental car at Classic Collision. And then biking comfort, again, 80% extreme discomfort. So that was kind of the survey highlights. I'm trying to think, the survey itself, what was the other? There was one other one. There was a whole bunch of discussion around rotaries or and whether that was something that people were comfortable with. Ultimately, people had a high level of comfort with rotaries, but when I finally got to the engineering recommendations, it didn't seem like rotaries were something that they were actually going to ultimately recommend as a remediation for this section of 3A. So even though people were comfortable with the concept of rotaries, it wasn't going to be a solution that at least tech engineering was going to recommend. So there's tons of detail. I think this whole document is like 29 pages. It has all of the individual survey questions. It's broken out by respondent group, abutters, commercial, general residents. And then there's like a comments section, which is actually, pretty interesting, just to get a flavor of what people, care about. But, what I took away from the comments was basically this is long overdue. So please proceed forward on our behalf. Jen, did you have any other observations on the survey data itself?
On 3A, I agree that we should get more businesses engaged, and that should not be difficult. My guess is that if there are only 3 that responded, it means we weren't getting to the owners. So
Yeah.
there should be a way to get them engaged, and that would be a very critical part of it. It certainly is clear that people don't want to walk or bike along 3A, and I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to do it either. I mean, it's I think I'm not entirely. I know there are parts of 3A where the Cohasset police do patrol and try to keep the speeds down, but for the most part, people drive whatever they can possibly drive in terms of speed. So I think there's a lot of work that could be done along that from that standpoint.
Yep.
And did anyone no one has addressed the issue of no access to Cohasset Village from the Cohasset train station?
Well, so this is going to address that ultimately, because the idea would be that you would come down North Main and turn onto Lower King, connect up from Lower King onto 3A with an improved road layout, which would make safe space for pedestrian and biking to bike all the way down to MBTA, connect into the train station and or connect into the recreational space of Wampatuck. So this is the solution for that connectivity.
Well, I'm thinking of somebody coming into Cohasset Station and then trying to get to Cohasset Village.
Yeah, and that's a point, Julia, that we've talked about in the Harbor Committee as well, because what we'd like to do is ultimately make it accessible, make the harbor accessible to people who come by train.
Bring a bike.
And yeah, or bus. Yeah, bus is fine, but
Which,
if
yeah,
you drop
but
off
don't you,
train,
don't
you're
you,
not
I'm
gonna
sorry
get
to interrupt, but don't you think we should have named it Crustacean?
the what?
Instead of Cohasset, it could be Crustacean. Ha ha ha.
Mhm.
Sorry,
Okay.
I'll shut up right now. Okay.
I hear you. I hear you, Tim.
Yeah.
You know, this is about the, I guess this is addressing the pedestrian and the biking access between the two. It's not addressing the bigger visitor to Cohasset coming down on a train.
Yeah.
That has to be pondered separately. I'm not sure that this 3A North study is going to really get at that necessarily.
Excuse me, but when I was working for the Historical Society, that was pretty major because when we had that incredible painting exhibit, what, 4 summers ago, tons of phone calls from people saying, I can get to Cohasset, but how do I get to the Historical Society?
Okay.
One question that I had in looking at this stuff was that there was almost like a suggestion of there being like a slow, that Cohasset would be like a super slow part of 3A. And it almost accepted the concept of like the photograph of the bike lanes kind of almost made it look like Elm Street Quarter as opposed to what it looks like, you know, down by, you know, the shipyard. And I guess realistically, I think we're kind of fighting nature a little bit if we're trying to slow. So what I find really dangerous about 3A is the stop and start and all the entries, like is that there are just so many business entries and so many ins and outs that are disruptive. Like it is a throughway. And then you've got just a million traffic spots. And if you look at some of kind of areas that feel safer and that seem to flow to allow for that, but also to allow traffic to flow, it's where they're kind of trying to combine the entry points for areas in one place. So for, you know, you wouldn't have like one for Mary Lou's, one for Dunkin' Donuts, one for lunch, one for 3A pizza, but rather have like an entry point that allows people to get out of the way of traffic. And that strikes me as what becomes really, really dangerous about the way that traffic flows. And I'm just curious, like, also with your mention earlier, I don't know if this is where you were thinking of bringing in the public space development, but I guess, is there any concept of trying to limit the number of curb cuts and like flow traffic better into the commercial space so that it's not so frequently cars coming out and cars coming in? You know, every other part of 3A is pretty fast moving in all other towns. And I appreciate that people want to slow it down, and I get that from a safety standpoint, but it seems like it's more like this unique aspect of our commercial curb cuts than it is.
Well, you've got some good points there. Would you suggest a stop sign or a light at the end of Sawyer Street to 3A?
So
That's my street and I have to drive it all the time. And I was curious whether that's what they were talking about with that rotary.
well, so I think I finally got to the recommendations section around what, so let me walk you guys quickly through the second
Can I
document.
say one thing first
Yeah.
about the rotaries? The reason that they probably are disinclined to rotaries is rotaries take a lot of space. And what you have at 3A is a canyon. And so, right, you've got a roadway and then it drops off and it rises. And so the amount of frontage they would have to take in order to put one in anywhere would be very expensive and really disorienting and probably not very functional because it's just a narrow path.
And the rotary is an ancient traffic solution. The first one was 1930s when we never
I
had
mean, it's good for
traffic.
certain things, but not for others.
But you guys are gonna be shocked at the thought that the Mass DOT has put into rotaries in a second. Because they have like a whole 8-point criteria on pros and cons, and they've rated our 4 intersections versus it. So like they've thought through this stuff. If you buy into their thought process. So this is the section that we're talking about, and what the traffic memo that's dated from end of August does is a lot of it focuses on is on flow overall, but it focuses on the 4 intersections. This is the intersection at Mbta train station that's signaled. This is the Lower King Mathnasium, which is across from the storage place and potentially across from the Scituate Hill additional development, commercial development. This is unsignaled. You've got Sawyer Street, which is unsignaled, and then you've got the Stop and Shop Plaza in front of the other part of King Street, which is signaled. This is the section, and they focus a lot of their effort on looking at these intersections in terms of like what the data is. So the memo itself, for those that want to go through it, goes through kind of a state in terms of like what the actual components are in terms of each of these. In terms of sidewalks, of which there are none, where there are left turn lanes, where it's 1 lane versus 2 lanes. So there's kind of an existing conditions section that starts off the document. They did do, as part of this, a traffic count. So as an example, they did a traffic count, I think it was April 14th of this past year. They did a traffic count in terms of cars, but they also did a count in terms of pedestrian and bicycle use. And so this is the observation in this paragraph right here in terms of the intersection in front of King Street and Cohasset Plaza, at which they found that there were 70 pedestrian crossings and a lower number of 10 bicyclist crossings. So they went and they did that for each of them. The 2 areas that had the pedestrian and the bicycle crossings count that really popped were this one in front of the Stop and Stop Plaza because of the connectivity, I think, to Turkey Hill. And then similarly, the MBTA signaled cross into Wampatuck, which is really where you see the pedestrian and the bicycle pop. One thing I did note in this existing conditions, and this is, I think, kind of going to where your head was at, Jen, trying to find the right page. I think it's page 8. Yeah, here we go. So they get into a very technical discussion around how they're going to adjust the traffic counts for pandemic lulls. And so they have just so if people are worried, they're not just going based on the traffic counts from April, they're doing a COVID adjustment, knowing that there was a deep depression in traffic due to COVID. And then they also have a growth factor that they use based on standards. But one of the things I noted was they have a section in here for specific developments that could impact the traffic counts or could impact the pedestrian and biker impacts. And the only one that they note in the memo is 380, 390 CJC and the impact of the 20-unit apartment complex. I thought, Amy, that there was a miss in terms of not talking about the Scituate Hill commercial development that's going to impact the intersection with Lower King, which is unsignaled and right in front of Mathnasium. So I was going to suggest that we go back to Brian and Jason and recommend that be noted in the memo.
Yeah,
That's a
it
good-
was, you know, the difficult thing about a site plan review is that it's got very strict requirements for what the planning board can say and do. And as a result, in our next meeting, we're planning to condition the project, but there's only so much. It's a funny situation in which they basically will do a traffic study. They'll say this is the best that we can do, and we'll try as hard as we can. But in fact, stopping something would require evidence that there have been accidents, that there has been a longstanding problem that is you know, irretrievable with this as an additional impact. And because it's a destination rather than something that would be going, you know, car after car after car after car. And also, honestly, the data that they have access to is a kind of COVID era data in which there's a lot of assumptions that have to be made that may or may not be really appropriate for both the development or how Cohasset grows. And I asked them about growth numbers and various things like that. And so we will be making the best attempt to work collaboratively with the developer to eke out as many good practices as we possibly can, but it's not as if we have a carte blanche to say, you can't do this, you've got to do that.
But I appreciate you sharing that perspective, but I think on the flip side, this memo and this dialogue with the state is the opportunity for the town to have the state help us put in place remediations if they know about the potential development. Lauren, you have your hand up.
Sorry, this is just an excellent catch because they reached out to me to ask me about potential developments in the area before the Scituate Hill application was even a thought on the horizon. So now the TEC actually did the peer review for the Scituate Hill project. So they definitely just must have put this data piece together and then not looked at it again, because this should absolutely include the Scituate Hill development.
Yeah.
Like I said, they had reached out to me before that was even a thing, and that was the one that came to mind. It was the only thing really that was percolating at the time, but this should also include Scituate Hill.
Okay.
Yeah. The other
We
piece
haven't
that
really
might
seen
be a
this,
twink.
right,
Oh,
Lauren?
sorry.
We haven't seen this on the planning board.
I'm
Is it-
sorry?
We haven't seen the document, the Cohasset traffic memorandum, right?
No.
No. Okay, so so actually, Lauren, sorry to do planning board business, but can you distribute this please to the planning board prior to our meeting next week?
Yes.
Great.
I was just going to also mention, I know it may just be a twinkle in someone's eye, but Avalon's additional units that popped up as a possibility and has a couple of times. I guess I wonder if we just want a placeholder for future development. You look up there and I guess I see the intersections they're talking about, and those are sort of roadway intersections, but between, you know, Avalon and the pediatric / sports complex are two private drives that are essentially function as roads.
Yeah.
And as you think about the capacity for development up the hill, I guess I don't know that we have to be super specific, but I think we might at least put a placeholder for known and unknown development.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was just about, because you didn't mention that earlier when you were talking about crossroads or crosswalks in that portion of 3A.
Okay. I like the way you framed it, Jen, about they've mapped out the public ways, you know, but they haven't mapped out two critical private ways, Avalon, and then the health complex / Cohasset sports. That roadway, both those impact their private ways with significant traffic.
And I've recently been indoctrinated into the soccer universe, which I had not previously been. I now see how much space is up there and how easily it could get developed. You could really easily see more going in up there.
Yeah. The other one that I had on my list, Lauren, was, you know, when we complete the Sawyer Street sidewalks from Fair Oaks to 3A, which is going to happen in the next 12 months, I actually think that that's going to have a spike in the pedestrian and biking volume up to Thayer Whitney Woods. Like when you look at the counts currently, I think it's suppressed because the sidewalks end and you wouldn't choose to do that. But once the sidewalks are complete, you take your car. But once the sidewalks are complete, for families that are looking to do that connection to Thayer Whitney Woods, once the sidewalk is done, you're going to have an increase in pedestrian and biking count. So I think it's worth us adding that note also in terms of, because it's an intersection they're analyzing. It just kind of bolsters the argument that there's going to be more, non-car traffic that's crossing there. So those were the two. I like Jen's comment about Avalon Addition and some of those private ways, the Scituate Hill, and then the Sawyer Street sidewalks impacting in terms of specific other developments. The memo then goes on, it goes into lots and lots of details about traffic counts and safety data. I know people get really emotional about, and rightly so, about safety on 3A. The state has some really hard and fast rules that they use in terms of crash data. So I'll show you that in a second. This diagram, which is like page 10 or something, literally gives you all of the counts on that one day. So on that one day, this is the intersection of this is the intersection of King, Lower King, which is Mathnasium right here. There were 665 cars that headed south. There were 779 cars headed north. You can see the number that there were 118 that made a right turn. There were 134 that made a left turn. So they collect all of this data in terms of analyzing what specific intersections look like. And Amy, this might be helpful for your board just to understand the current count, because Scituate Hill is going to go in up here in terms of like what the data looked like on one day in April. The crash data, they collected crash data at the four intersections, the 2 signaled and unsignaled, and then they crunched the data. So this is all the crash data for 5 years. There were roughly, I'm just estimating, 60 crashes here. And it was split 28 in front of a signaled Cohasset Plaza, 11 at Sawyer Street, 13 at Lower King Mathnasium, and 5 at the Mbta station. They then go through, and the state has all of these standards around the crash rate per million vehicles. And so they calculate the MEV for each of these intersections. And so they have calculated the MEV for the 3 intersections. The highest MEV, just based on the highest number of crashes, was the Cohasset Plaza Stop and Shop. What's interesting is that they then apply state standards for whether your MEV for that intersection matches a state standard for signaled or unsignaled. And interestingly, the state average in terms of signaled crashes, in terms of the MEV, is 0.78. So the average is 0.78 for a signaled. We're at 0.75 for Cohasset Plaza. So we're kind of average in terms of our crashes at Cohasset Plaza. In terms of the other signaled, which is the Mbta station entrance, we're at 0.16, where the state average is 0.78. So from the state's perspective, like, this is a super safe intersection. And then unfortunately, Cohasset Plaza, it isn't, I mean, it seems unsafe to some of us, but it is the average, unfortunately. And then in terms of the unsignaled MEV for the state is 0.57. Sawyer Street is at 0.29, and I don't do a left on Sawyer unless like it's an absolute emergency. I go down to it somewhere else to make my left-hand turn. And then the Mathnasium Lower King one is 0.35. So again, while we see them as dangerous from a state perspective. It's not even meeting the average in terms of unsignaled crashes. So I just wanted to share that data point with you guys. And again, this is how the state views us from the lens of overall data. And they do it both on state averages, and then they have, I think we're in region 5. So they measure us against region 5.
Katie, I'm sorry to interrupt, but isn't the most dangerous intersection in Cohasset the one at Beechwood in 3A?
I think it is. And there were similar.
So, I'm sorry, did they do any studies of that?
Yes, and so these exact memos and exact work was done for 3A South when back in 2013. And based on that work, they have come up with the 3A South plan that is actually going to be it's getting funded and construction in late 2022 or early 2023. So they've already looked at 3A South, decided what the a designed plan is. There was a public forum on that redesign for 3A South right before COVID hit in March. And I think they're going to have another kind of public forum, a final one before they start construction in 2022, but that's already underway. So yeah, this all has been analyzed for Beechwood, and you're right, Beechwood is higher than some of these MEVs. I don't remember what it was, but the data is there for those that are
Yeah,
interested.
I've got another
Thank you.
appointment that I've got to get to. Do you have anything you need from me before to wrap up?
No, as long as you're willing to come along for the ride in terms of help.
I'll
on-
come along for the ride. Okay, thank you.
Uh,
Good night.
Good night. So this is the crash data. I just wanted to highlight that. They go through a similar thing in terms of speeds, in terms of what the speed limits are, and then they again clocked the speeds of traffic northbound and southbound. It's when you look at averages, it doesn't look horrible in terms of like the speed for North King Street. The speed limit is 50 miles per hour, and the average northbound was 52, and the southbound was below the 50. But we all know that averages sometimes lie when you have somebody that's cooking down there. So they then do a whole thing technical about sight distances, which I won't go into, which is like looking at the intersections and measuring whether we meet standards in terms of sight distances. Not surprisingly, the 2 intersections at Route 3A Sawyer, it fails in terms of sight distances when you're looking south. The recommend is 360 feet, and we're at 300. So we've got a sight line issue when you're when you're at that intersection headed south. And then we have, interestingly, Amy, and this is for you and the planning board, there's a sight line deficiency at Scituate Hill, where the minimum is 420 to 480.
We brought that up to them, and the answer was that they'll do the very best they can. They're already starting to talk to the neighbor next door. But in the end, if there's a private property and they don't own it, then they are limited to what they can do. But they have already reached out to talk to the owners of the property next door.
Okay. Yeah, and I appreciate that, but this just gives you some data, and standards that the state is measuring that intersection against in terms of sight lines. And the memo itself does say that unfortunately road curvature, the existing road curvature is a big factor in those sight lines. And so when you get to a redesign, my guess is that you have some ability to adjust within the easement so that perhaps you improve these. But the reality is that the current road curvature within the easement is causing the sightline deficiencies.
Yeah, I asked if they could actually bring the hillside down, right? Cut in and level off and then push back. And they could be, that could be something we could ask them to explore. In the end, it will really be whether they're willing to negotiate with the neighbor and whether the neighbor is willing to allow that to take place and what's the cost to the project.
there's a whole bunch of discussion around what warrants a traffic signal, and they have standards for Mass DOT around what warrants traffic signals. And then they go into a rather long dissertation around roundabouts and whether they're advantageous or not advantageous. And they have a checklist of when roundabouts are advantageous, and they have a similar checklist around when roundabouts are not advantageous. And basically our 4 intersections have equal number of advantageous and disadvantageous. So their conclusion was that roundabouts are not for us. So, but I'm getting to the final piece of good news in all of this, which is at the very end, which I didn't find until after I had been reading for like 45 minutes at this point. They do get to recommendations. Let me see if I can find it. Oh my goodness. On page 29, at this point, my husband had abandoned me. He's like, stop speaking to me from the other room about your traffic observations. So the recommendations, so they went through and they came up with a series of preliminary recommendations based on all of this data and analysis. And for the 2 signaled intersections, which are Mbta and Stop and Shop Plaza, they basically noted that there's some deficiencies currently that they feel like could be addressed. And then there's some longer term things that could be addressed. But when it came to the signaled intersections, to be frank, I didn't see anything that was like too, a lot of it was adjusting timing of the green or timing of the walk, amount of time for the walk at MBTA station, or in some cases, we actually don't have a radar detection for emergency vehicles at one of those sites. So that wasn't super exciting. What was exciting was at the Scituate Hill and King Street, the long term was implement traffic signal control at the intersection to reduce delay in queuing. So I took this as they are recommending a traffic light at 3A and Lower King. So that was good news, Amy.
That is actually really good news because, I mean, think about the consequences of this, given that there's an offset, right? It's not a direct straight across. There's a little jag. That for them to say this must mean that they understand that there really is physical adjustment to the landscape of not an inconsequential nature in order for a light to be in place there.
Now, this was tech's recommendation. Ultimately, the state has to, this isn't like the end all be all, but like at least the engineer hired by the town, this is their preliminary recommendation. Then I part of the question that I have here for Brian and Jason is like, I finally got to this point. I was like, okay, hallelujah. Like there's a traffic light recommendation, but now that there's a recommendation from the town's consultant, what does that mean in terms of the state ultimately granting you one on 3? So that was good news there. And then similarly, they suggested slightly widening King Street westbound, which is like the section right next to Mathnasium, so that instead of having kind of it's kind of an informal 2, having a formalized 2, so widening it there. They don't talk about, they actually have a bunch of things, interestingly, Amy, that they're recommending short-term in terms of the Scituate Hill commercial driveway. Like they're deficient in terms of a stop sign. They don't have a stop line, lane improvements in terms of markings.
Yeah, you wonder how they got away with that, actually. It is very obvious. And then you can see that people that are driving there are stumped by it. They don't know whether they go or don't go.
There's like zero. So I thought it was interesting just to sort of say that there are some short-term things that we could do that to make that less deficient and in the short term, just so you know. And then similarly for Sawyer Street, the recommendation was long-term implementing signal control. So that I thought was a positive. In terms of short term, they had some things that they were recommending in terms of lane markings again. And then they have some signage compliance issues. But the bottom line was that the initial recommendation there was traffic signal control at the 2 unsignaled intersections. So
May I
what-
comment on the intersection you were just talking about and the Sawyer Street? One of the issues I always found was cars pulling, if I'm there about to go left, the cars pulling up on the right block my view of the cars traveling southbound.
yeah, no,
And both of those, you know, so you end up staying a lot longer. Well, you know what I'm talking about. So can a light alleviate that? I hope.
well, I think so one of the things with the widening of the Lower King next to Mathnasium, widening that so that it can fully accommodate a right-hand turn and left-hand turn. And the question is whether you could draw the stop line in such a way so that the right-hand turn lane people were slightly ahead of the left turn people, so that you didn't have your view line blocked and you could keep on making your right turns. Because the left-hand turn people definitely creep forward. I hear you on that one and block your view. So I don't necessarily take that away, but it's a good input on that. But they certainly are thinking about ways to keep the right-hand turn flow going while you've got the left hand stopped, waiting for either a signal or in this case, a gap in the traffic until we get a signal put in place.
You know, there's nothing so awful as getting up to the top of Sawyer Street, you know, and you're almost clear, and then all of a sudden somebody pulls up on your right, and then you can't see anything up to the right. So they want to alleviate. How can they alleviate? Well, I'm sorry, never mind.
No, I hear you.
Katie, I have to go because I've got a class tomorrow morning and
Yep.
all day long teaching, but this was actually really interesting and I really look forward to it. And definitely everybody on the planning board needs to see this before our next meeting.
Okay, no, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Quickly, Amy, in terms of next steps, what I'd like to suggest is a series of meetings so that we can one with Jason and Brian to talk about 3A North, just to make sure that we understand exactly what next steps are around now that these 2 kind of preliminary data points have been collected and can be submitted to the states. That's one of the meetings I'd like to include in our next series of master plan implementation committee meetings. And then the other one is I'd like to have a meeting with Don Pyatt where he would come to us and talk to us about funding sources for sidewalks and how creative could we get in terms of like where sidewalk funding from above and beyond what we're already getting from Complete Street grants. And so that was sort of the 2 kind of sub-town employees that I'd like to bring in. One is Brian and Jason on 3A North, and then Don in terms of sidewalk funding.
Yeah, no, I think that would be good. It would be also, so these are things that we need to plan for and trying to figure out how the planning board be made aware and how we fit this kind of info in our meetings. Right now, things have been very slow, but it's not going to stay that way. And so I look to Lauren to suggest something that would work for her because she's going to be inundated and then she's going to need us to basically chop.
I think, Amy, that's a great point, and maybe something that you and I can talk about as we talk about planning board agenda setting is sort of fitting in really when we talk about our committee liaisons or staff updates, we can talk about formalizing that in a more sequential pattern that we can have these kind of updates definitely be added in, not just when we happen to have time for them, but make a point to include them in our regular business.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Amy.
Thank-
So for those of you who are sort of sticking around, I guess what I was hoping is that that we could agree that the next couple meetings, instead of perhaps doing our roundtable of, reviewing all of the implementation priorities, is focus the next couple meetings on transportation and circulation and do a deep dive on 3A North and 3A South so that we know exactly what's happening, and then we can publish an update to the community. Like I feel like one of the things that we can offer, since we have access to the data and we're pretty up to speed, is that if we just get a little bit more information and clarity from Jason and Brian, that we could publish a 3A North update and a 3A South update to the community around here's what to expect in the next 12 months on 3A South, and here's what to expect in the next couple of years in terms of 3A North. Does that sound like something that the community would want to hear?
Yeah,
I
I
would-
definitely.
Yeah, why not?
And I guess the only thing I would throw in is Julia's point from earlier, which is I think the obvious question is going to be about connectivity to the village. So
Yeah.
I think even if it's not part of the scope, I think at least being able to include some messaging about that being on the agenda and how it fits in, I think would be helpful, just because I think it's going to be the inevitable question.
I'm sorry, I'm raising both hands. Look at the difference. What happened to Cohasset? The train came to Cohasset Village. And then when it was reinstated, oh no, we don't want all this riffraff coming to the village. That's what happened, don't you think?
Yeah, I wasn't really, I had kids in diapers when the train came back. And so I wasn't really paying
Yeah.
attention to the politics of why we didn't have a downtown village station versus why the station landed out where it did.
Yeah, it just makes me wonder,
Yeah, I don't know. So my one of my goals or work products for our committee specifically was a communication update to the broader Cohasset around 3A North and 3A South, because I think we're uniquely positioned to do that because we've got the information and we've kind of been up to speed. The second work product that I wanted to take on as a committee itself was talking with Don Pyatt about funding sources and getting serious around, what are realistically funding sources that we can generate outside of the grant funding, because we know grant funding is going to be limited right now in terms of complete streets to $400,000 every 4 years. And that gets us one sidewalk segment realistically. So I want to have that conversation. So I'm going to reach out to Don and see if he'd be willing to come and talk to us about realistically where we might be able to squeeze and how we might be able to think about that. And then the second thing I wanted to do after we have the funding source conversation with Don was do a deeper dive in the sidewalk priorities themselves, because I think that's another kind of buried treasure that nobody knows about in town, is that we have mapped out 30 segments, but nobody's kind of explained to the community what those 30 segments are, what the timeline, how could you group them? Some of them group around ADA improvements, some of them group around connectivity to open space. Like, I think there's a way to kind of explain what these 30 segments are and why the community said they were important. And then perhaps start to articulate what the top, 5 or 10 that we would start to tackle of that 30 would look like. But I think unless we do it as a committee, nobody else is going to do it.
I also,
So
I
when
do
did,
wanna-
sorry.
Oh, no, sorry, Julia, go ahead.
No, I remember my friend Peter Purse was on the sidewalk committee. Did that fade off into the distance?
Yeah, it does not exist
Yeah.
anymore. We are the sidewalk committee. really.
Okay, go on, Jen.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I would be really interested in that because I remember looking at that list and wondering where those priorities came from. And I know things move up and down, but I guess I was wondering whether there's any, like, a framework that you would look at all of those through the same lens. So there are a few that are obvious to me. So one is safety, one is like traffic level,
Yeah.
and I mean, obviously, I think there are, like you said, a lot others like ADA and connectivity, but also just feasibility, like, cost. There are going to be some that are going to be require easements and that are virtually impossible. And there's
Yeah, you've got some very good points. You really do. Could you talk more about the easements, Katie?
So this is where I think we need to get into the details. I think you're right that right now, if I was going to do two things with that list of 31 segment priorities, one is I would map it so it's just visual instead of an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Second thing is I would try and run it through a filter to say, of these 31, these segments have ADA accessibility compliance. These relate to safety concerns. And I'm sure, Jen, as we look at it, we'll come up with some other categories that'll jump off the page, but cost and engineering feasibility and some of that addresses easements is another kind of lens to sort it by. And I don't think anybody's done that. Like, we have the list, but nobody's sort of thought about it in terms of like, what lenses can you apply to kind of organize it a little bit?
My guess is that a lot of that has been incorporated in some way. I'm sure that a lot of these factors have been considered, but it would just be helpful to walk through it and see how mathematically we would look at that.
Yeah, tease it apart a little bit. No, I mean, the list was compiled based on two things. One is there was definitely input from the town in terms of like safety and ADA and things that just needed to get done for compliance purposes. And the other part of the list was the wants and needs of the community. And the wants and the needs, I don't think have been organized, but I think if you start looking at them, you'll begin to see a theme. You'll be able to see some themes, whether it's connectivity, whether it's safety, or other things. And I think if we can take it from just a list of 31 and organize it for folks, it's gonna be much more useful. So that was my hope, is like, make it visual and then organize it and put a framework around it so that people understand why are we doing this and how we might go about picking the top 5 or the top 10 off that list once we kind of organize it on a framework. So I was hoping that if with people's buy-in, we could kind of take a break from the implementation updates and kind of do some focus work ourselves around transportation and circulation, specifically 3A and sidewalks.
Sounds great.
Okay, that's great. I'm kind of excited to do that for a couple months, and it's not like the other stuff. The other stuff I feel like has momentum behind it, at least for us to take a little break from. Lauren, I don't know if you agree with that, but I kind of feel like us doing a little focus work as a committee might be a good thing.
I agree. Yeah, I think the other initiatives sort of have a home and some legs right now, so it's a good opportunity to take this time to work on this group.
So I'll try and put together a little work plan and line up some meetings with Jason and Brian and Don so that they're available to us when we need them. I just had a question about next meeting date, and obviously we've lost a lot of people on the call. I had proposed October 11th, but Lauren, you pointed out that that's actually a federal holiday, so we can't meet on that. So.
That's the day after my surgery too, so
okay.
I won't be able to see you on that day.
Yeah,
Understandable.
exactly.
Oh,
So
I'm sorry, it's the day before. I could see you. You said October 11th.
exactly.
Yeah, no, my surgery's October 12th, so
Yes.
I could, yeah.
Well, the 11th is Columbus Day, so we can't hold a public meeting on it. Do people want to, I was thinking October 18th is our alternative date as our next meeting. It's a little bit longer, but. I don't know how people feel. I'm kind of agnostic.
Yeah, maybe send it out just because there are so many people, we would want to get the maximum. I could do the 18th. I could also push it up to the 4th, depending on what you think.
Okay.
So maybe send
Might
it
be
around.
eyeing the 4th for Elm Street Forum, just
Oh,
put that in the calendar.
yes, that's great.
Okay, so
Either
let's,
4th or the 7th.
I guess that week is kind of Elm Street week of October.
That's true.
Leave that Elm Street week. The next week, honestly, is a little complicated for me just personally with kids being out of school a couple days. So let's target the 18th, but I'll poll the group to make sure.
Sounds good.
So all I can promise, that will be 6 days after my surgery. So I might just sit here and go like, you know. but-
We'll talk about what other form you're available, and before then, like, connecting you into Elm Street. And-
Yes, please do. I'm feeling very negative about this whole thing.
No.
Really am.
No, it's
I want a view. I want a view of the harbor.
Oh my
the way
gosh,
it needs to be.
completely agree with you, by the way.
Not some
front-
condos
yeah.
here and then,
Yeah.
it's gotta be. Well, I'm not gonna keep you. I adjourn.
All right, guys, I appreciate it. It's at 9 o'clock. I know it's a long meeting, but it's good. I think we've got a plan for the fall, and we're all kind of updated on everything that took place over the summer. So thank you for that.
Great. Thank
All
you
right.
guys.
Thanks,
Thanks
guys.
for-
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, bye.
Thank